Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman.
This week on Heroic Media, a new law in Massachusetts threatens pro-life outreach to women seeking abortions.
The death of iconic comedian and actor Robin Williams reopens the discussion of mental illness.
Conservative blogger Matt Walsh says he will not teach his kids about safe sex because there is no such thing.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we discuss issues that deal with family and marriage and life. And the reason that we focus on those topics is that they're very fundamental moral issues. We're really talking about the foundation of society here.
Absolutely. And a lot of the stories that we'll discuss revolve around abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly.
So what's our first story?
Thanks, Patrick. First for today, a new law in Massachusetts limits pro-lifers seeking to talk to women entering abortion clinics. This comes less than 2 months after the Supreme Court struck down a similar law in the state.
Well, it just seems like you hear these stories a lot, right, with these Supreme Court decisions and laws being struck down that were put in place before. And it's just kind of frustrating, the tug of war that keeps going back and forth. It almost seems like it's just based on opinions, and if you get the right judge that, you know, your law is going to stand or not stand. You know?
It's frustrating. In this case, it's particularly frustrating because the Supreme Court ruled unanimously, meaning all of the justices, the liberal, conservative, all different ideologies, all 9 of them, said, no, this law is not acceptable. Even the most pro-abortion justices said, no, this law is not acceptable. So to give our viewers a little bit of background, in June, the Supreme Court said that a Massachusetts law enacting a 35-foot buffer zone around the entrance of abortion clinics was unconstitutional. So basically this said within 35 feet, these people who are protesting or petitioning, giving out pamphlets, just praying with women, talking to women, were not allowed to enter inside.
It violated free speech, is what they said. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, so now, less than 2 months later, Massachusetts says, okay, well, we'll pass a new law, and if there are any complaints of someone substantially impeding access to an abortion clinic, the police can order them to go 25 feet away. But it's the language is very vague, and so we don't know how it's going to be enforced, and it basically looks like this could just be the same thing that was just struck down back again in a new form.
Exactly. It's like, did they strike it down just so that they could make this other form that has more loosely defined or not defined terms? You know, how is it going to be enforced, right? How are police actually going to enforce this? There's all kinds of different scenarios that you could think of that, I mean, what's to say that these abortion workers just couldn't start their day at, you know, they open at 8 and then at 8:05 they call in and they say, oh, you know, there's somebody that's impeding, you know, somebody from entering the building or whatever. And then they just come out and say, okay, now there's going to be this 25-foot buffer for the rest of the day. And I mean, and then what if one of these sidewalk counselors is talking to a person that's coming in, and then they decide, you know, to meet and discuss, and, you know, she hands this person a pamphlet or something, right? And then could that be considered a gathering, right? Because that's also one of the other rules inside of this law, that there can't be a gathering. So it's like, well, who's gonna, it's just so loosely, it's not been defined what these words mean. So it seems like we've gone from a bad law to, you would hope to be a better law because it goes from 35 feet, you know, down to 25 feet. It's a smaller radius, but then it's like, okay, now there's all this new terminology that hasn't been clearly defined, so it's kind of shaky. It could really go either way. It's really.
And the whole premise of it just seems to be to try to like slide in under the court ruling and try to. I mean, Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston, so he's the local bishop there, and he said the effect again is to make it very difficult for citizens seeking to offer alternatives when contemplating an abortion. So it's just, and at the same time, I thought this was interesting. The city of Madison, Wisconsin actually did the opposite. They just suspended enforcement of their existing buffer law because they looked at the Supreme Court ruling and they said, ours is probably invalid as well. So we're not going to enforce this because it looks like under the Supreme Court ruling, we need to completely open up access to these abortion clinics. So it's just, you can see just the intent here, what people are doing and what they're really trying to do is kind of clear.
Absolutely, I agree. And pro-abortion groups love these laws that put these buffer zones around abortion clinics because they know they work, right? It seems like nowadays women who are contemplating abortion, when they just have some information, when they're informed, they're able to make an informed decision, that oftentimes they have a change of heart. And this information can come in the form of like pamphlet or just a personal interaction with somebody, or for instance, ultrasounds, like the ultrasound laws and things like that, or even voluntary ultrasounds. Once they see, they have that information, they go, oh, this isn't just a clump of tissue or a blob of cells or a meaningless piece of human tissue. It's actually a human person growing inside of me. They're able to make an informed decision, and most of the time they choose life. And so these, of course, I hate these laws because it just restricts further what pro-life groups can do.
Exactly.
For these
yeah,
women.
yeah. So much for informed choice, you know. And,
right.
And another interesting way that you can sort of tell this is trying to target the pro-lifers. The punishment, the penalty is ridiculous. $1,000 or 6 months in jail for standing too close to the door.
Right.
I mean, it's just absurd, and you can. It's very disproportionate, and you just look at it and you go, yeah, that's not what. The Supreme Court is clearly trying to talk against this. If you look at what the Supreme Court said in its June ruling, this is called McCullen versus Coakley. And the court said, it is no accident that public streets and sidewalks have developed as venues for the exchange of ideas. Even today, they remain one of the few places where a speaker can be confident that he's not simply preaching to the choir. So they had a very strong ruling saying, no, you need this exchange of ideas. Maybe these pro-abortion people don't want them to have access to this information and to this knowledge, but that's so important to our society, is people being able to speak up and say, well, actually, here's another view on it. You can look into it and you can sort of see which one is correct.
Exactly. It's that value that we have as Americans for freedom of speech. And we need to be able to know our options and have open information. And whether that happens, I mean, I can't think of another better area for it to occur than right outside of an abortion clinic, right? You know these people are coming in to get abortions. So, like, that's the best place. How else are you going to reach out to these people in such a direct manner? And I think that as long as pro-lifers do it in a charitable manner,
and peaceful,
in a peaceful manner, important. There's no issues with it, and it shouldn't be blocked. So,
absolutely.
All right. In our next story, famous actor and comedian Robin Williams was found dead this week after an apparent suicide. This news obviously saddened many people, but it also brought back memories of joy and laughter that he brought to so many people. Now, Michelle, this obviously brought up a lot of other questions too, especially related to suicide and the circumstances and all of this. I guess let's start off with, what were your initial reactions to hearing that Robin Williams had passed away?
Well, I think, like, you know, most of America, I was absolutely just shocked and saddened by it, really grieved. And then as you looked into it a little bit more, you see that he had been suffering openly with very severe depression. He had in the past, struggled with both drug and alcohol addiction. So this is a really tragic situation. But I think it does draw some attention to suicide. And more than 39,000 people committed suicide in the U.S. in 2010, which is the most recent year that the CDC had data for. So I think we need to look at people who are struggling with suicidal thoughts, people who are struggling with mental illness. How do we look at them and respect them in a life-affirming way?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because being pro-life is more than just battling against abortion, right? It reaches out into all these other facets of what it means to be pro-life, and this is one of them. And I think Robin Williams' death will, no doubt, it's kind of revived or stoked the fire of, we need awareness and we need more information and better information regarding depression and mental illness, right? Because so many people don't understand it. I mean, I know for myself, like, I don't really understand depression a whole lot either. And I think that it's hard for a lot of people that are on the outside looking in. I've never suffered from depression before. I know several people who have, and I remember when they were suffering from depression that it was one of these situations where I felt like, well, just, get happy or get over it. But it's more than that. It's a lot more. It's not that simple, and it is really, there's a lot more to it than that.
I think your point is a good one, because a lot of people, I think, don't understand this unless they've personally experienced it or seen a loved one struggle through it. It's something that there's not enough awareness about. So just education is a big part of this, the reality of depression, that there's a difference between feeling sad after a breakup or a loved one's death versus depression where there doesn't seem to be any cause and is prolonged. And also, if there's more education, we can have more people seeking help, because if people are just told that they need to snap out of it, they need to do it all on their own, they're not going to be seeking treatment.
That's true. Yep.
And we need, also I think a supportive community, both for the individual and for their family members,
Yeah.
because this can be really hard.
Yeah.
And there does tend to be a stigma where, Robin Williams, I was reading in one article that he was uncomfortable talking about it, even though his struggle with it was public, because he was afraid that people would just dismiss it.
Right.
And I think that happens a lot. And so if
Right.
we're not willing to talk about it, to go out in the open, to accept people, if there's this stigma, people are not going to be able to talk about it.
There is that stigma. People think that, like, look at that person that has depression, and a lot of people think, oh, that person's just weak, or they can just get over it by themselves, like you were saying. But there needs to be a lot of help, and there's mental and physical and spiritual aspects to helping those people recover. And I think as Christians, we just need to be there for those for those people that are suffering from depression. And a lot of times it can be hard to identify. So at least in my experience, I've known several people, sadly, that have committed suicide. And when they do commit suicide, it's like such a shock. And you're like, oh, like maybe I had not been quite so much in touch with that person, but I didn't realize that there was something so wrong that they would take their own life. Right,
and that's something to be aware of, to learn, to educate about what are the red flags, how can you encourage someone to get treatment, all these kind of things. And this is another interesting thing, the Academy of Motion Pictures of Arts and Sciences, this is the people behind the Oscars, they posted a picture on Twitter, and it was the genie character from Aladdin, this iconic character hugging Aladdin, and it's at the end of the movie, it's a very sort of iconic image with the words, "Genie, you're free," which is what Aladdin tells Genie at the end of the movie. And I can, this got a lot of kickback, and the idea is understandable. Okay, you're free from these years of struggling with depression, with these addictions, all these different things, but there was a lot of criticism of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this tweet was retweeted like 69,000 times, I believe it was, or sorry, 270,000 times, which means it was probably viewed about 69 million times. And so basically this tweet has caused some unrest, especially amongst those organizations that battle against these mental illnesses and against suicide, and they're worried that, for instance, one person said, if it doesn't cross the line, it comes very, very close to it. So that's the chief medical officer at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Now, they're worried because it gives this sense of people, like for people that are battling with depression, this might give a sense of, oh, well, if you commit suicide, then you're being freed, right? You're getting rid of all your problems, which is very contrary to what we teach about suicide. It's not good. It's not a good thing. It doesn't for you. You need to get the proper treatment for it.
Exactly. Suicide should never be presented as an option, as something that's liberating.
Exactly.
And so that's the big problem with this, is what message is this sending to other people who might be struggling with suicidal thoughts, that kind of thing. So I think this whole thing is drawing awareness. It's allowing people to see more about it. It's absolutely tragic, but hopefully we can grow from this as a society and prevent more tragedies. So I'd just like to say to our viewers, if you or a loved one is struggling with depression or with suicidal thoughts or tendencies, there is help available. There's a number for the suicide hotline, which you can find on the bottom of our screen. You can also find resources at the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we just would like to encourage you to reach out for help. There are people who can help you, and there are ways that you can rebuild, you can find hope, you can get the resources and the support that you need.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better.
Coming up after the break, we will have a guest to discuss the idea of safe sex. Is it real or is it a myth?
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova. For this segment, we have a special guest joining us, Catholic speaker and writer Mary Beth Bonacci. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you guys.
Excellent. And we're going to be discussing the following story. There was a recent blog post by prominent Catholic blogger Matt Walsh. And the title of this blog was, "I will not teach my kids about safe sex because there is no such thing." Now, Mary Beth, I think that this is like a very divisive topic, right? Because it seems so entrenched in school teaching, sex education, that safe sex, right? It's all about safe sex. So what are kind of like your ideas on this and what he had to say in particular about there is no such thing as safe sex?
What he had to say was fabulous. It's what I've been saying for years. It's that safe from what?
Yeah, exactly.
It's this idea that if you can prevent disease, somehow that's going to make sex safe. And Matt, I thought, made the excellent point that sex isn't intended to be safe.
Right.
God didn't create it to be safe. He created it to be this deep, not just physical experience, but emotional and spiritual experience that bonds two people together. Yeah. And so for the married, that idea of total self-donation, of giving themselves to each other in that safe environment where they've pledged to stay together forever, you've got a level of emotional safety and spiritual safety that the unmarried can't have, and particularly the hooking up, the teenager.
Right.
So it's interesting, they didn't really call it safe sex anymore. They have to call it safer sex. Because it's not even that good. The condom isn't that good at preventing what it's supposed to prevent, which is diseases. But what are you going to do to protect when you look at the emotional consequences, when you look at the bond that forms? How are you going to protect from that?
Right.
I always said there is no condom for the heart. And
yeah, that's true.
So marriage, committed sex, that's when it's safe. And it's interesting when you talk to people who have been there, people who have been sexually active, who've even been promiscuous, and you really get to talking to them honestly, they'll say, you know what, that makes sense, because when I got married, then I saw that it was like a whole different level. So yeah, Matt's right. There's no such thing.
Yeah.
And I think that the interesting point that you bring up about safer sex is not really safe, and the point that was made is, do you tell your kids, oh, well, if you're going to drink and drive, make sure you wear a seatbelt? Of course, that's absurd. You know, we hold people to a higher standard, but at the same time, there's this idea, oh, we shouldn't have abstinence-only sex ed because it doesn't work. You can't hold kids to this higher standard. They'll never do it. What's your thought
They're
on that?
going to do it anyway.
Right.
I told teenagers, like, for years, cattle are going to do it anyway. You can't stop cattle. That's why they have a crude little form of surgery, because you can't give a chastity talk to the cattle. Don't be going off to the fence. Don't be going. We hold our kids to a higher standard.
Right.
And there's really no other area where we give them this message that, well, this is what you should do, but you're not gonna.
Yeah.
You're gonna do it anyway, so here's this little piece of latex that's really, hopefully, might protect you from one of the tiny little consequences. I think there's a much bigger picture that this is a big, beautiful, incredible, awesome gift, and it belongs in a context, and not just, you can't respect that, you're gonna do it anyway, so too bad, so sad.
Right. And I think that we, as a society, have really created the need for what is commonly taught as safe sex, right? Because we've taken sex outside of the marital act, right? Because once you take it outside of the marital act, that's when it really, that's when those diseases, spread, and all the hookup culture, like you're talking about, becomes so rampant. And as you mentioned, there are, even with safe sex as it's being taught, there are still, like, condoms don't work all the time. There's still all kinds of other diseases. I mean, things don't work out right all the time, right? And I think there's just so many different layers that we could talk about with this talk, or with this subject rather. And I think that there's this kind of pessimistic, reductionist view of human sexuality, like Matt Walsh says. And I think I really align with that, because it is, and you guys have already talked about it, like this, it treats us human beings that have a will as animals, right? Like you were mentioning the cattle, which I thought was hilarious. That's truly what it does. It's like, you're an animal, you're gonna do it, so just be safe. But that's very contrary to what we are as humans, who we are as humans. We have a free will, and we have a choice, and we can make those choices. So, I mean, what are some of your thoughts on?
I think we fall into a trap when we reduce it in the same way, and when our abstinence education becomes, don't do it or you'll get a disease. Like the slideshow.
Yes.
Beep. Here's a beep.
We're zoomed in really far, so it looks really gross.
Yeah, instead of talking about love, which is what I've found, you talk to the average human of any time, of any age, of any generation, our primary hunger is for love.
Right.
And when you can tap into that and say, respecting this helps us find and live real love. And that's what you're hungry for. And so much of teen sexual activity particularly is fueled by that hunger for love. And if you can say, look, there's another way. That's what hooked me. And I think that's what gets their attention. This isn't just a way to avoid disease. This is a way to really find what you really want, and which is love. Not just spousal love, not just married love, but love. The love of God, the love of friendship, love in every area of our lives. Yeah. When we respect our body, respect the language of sexuality, it feeds love.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's a complete, like you're saying, it's a complete different context of sexuality. It's not just one thing, but what it's doing, this quote that I liked in the blog post, we have taken the honesty, love, passion, beauty, and creative power out of the act and replaced it with something sterile, guarded, frivolous, and disinterested. So, you know, this is an inherently vulnerable act, and you're taking that out of it and trying to say, no, 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 it's not. But then it is, so you're still suffering the consequences, the emotional consequences, which people don't talk about very much, spiritual, all these things.
That's exactly it. You called it.
Yep, exactly. And I like how you mentioned that too, because it really, Matt also talked about that the positives were flipped as the negatives, and that kind of ties in with what you just mentioned there. And I think that that's one of the things that society really does today that is really getting this whole topic, you know, into the safe sex category.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Mary Beth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. This was great.
All right.
We'll have one more story after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Heroic Media. In our final story, a federal judge has struck down an Alabama law that required doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at the local hospital. The governor, however, says that the law had been designed to protect women.
So, yet another instance of a law, right, being shot down. So, I guess we should start out with, why is it so important for these abortion clinics to have admitting privileges?
Right. I think that's a really good question. And you know, Alabama Governor Robert Bentley was actually talking about this, and he was saying that the whole point of this, he's actually a practicing doctor, and so he was explaining how it works, and if there's a complication with abortion, the woman goes into the hospital, but they sometimes don't have time to look into her whole medical history to see some of the problems, because if she's in the emergency room, she's not an established patient there like she would be with her doctor. And so if you bring in the doctor who performed the abortion, then they already know everything that was going on. They know all the details. If she's in a state where she's not thinking clearly or not able to talk or whatever.
Sometimes they don't reveal all the information that they need to know to treat them quickly.
So if you go to the emergency room, they're sometimes starting out in the dark. And so it's really important. This is designed to protect women, to just say, okay, the
women
doctor,
and babies.
Exactly, women and babies.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good point, right? This gap of information, especially, I think also just logically thinking about this, it makes sense that if you're performing some sort of procedure on a woman that could kill her,
which is a very severe, you know, it's a serious surgery.
And it's invasive, and there have been more than one accident, of course, that has occurred. And so I think it makes sense that if you're going to be performing these types of procedures on people, that you need to be able to take them to an emergency room, and you need to have those proper admitting privileges so that you can save their life, right? We always hear these talks about safe, legal, and rare, right? And it seems like more and more the true colors are coming out, and pro-abortion people, you know, abortion supporters, don't really actually care about so much so the safe part. They're more interested in making sure that it's available.
Right, and rare isn't not so much either.
Yeah, that's true too. Especially with like abortion quotas and stuff.
Legal is really what legal is important, but not so much safe or rare. But if you look at this ruling here, I think the logic behind it, the reasoning behind it is so absurd. So U.S. District Judge Myron Thompson, and he basically looked at this law and said, well, the majority of abortion clinics in several major cities in the state don't meet these standards, and so this law is invalid.
Right.
So here you have a health regulation, and the majority of abortion clinics, of medical facilities don't meet that standard. So should you lower the bar, or should you call all of them to raise their standards? It's just absurd that if we say, oh well, the majority of the majority of meat processing factories, well, we're going to lower the bar on health standards because they don't meet them. No, that's not what you do. You raise the standards for health and safety, and you call them to raise their standards and to raise the bar for the sake of health and safety.
Absolutely, just like you said, for the sake of health and safety, and I think that's what's most important. And then also, the district judge Myron Thompson said the following. He was kind of comparing like this whole situation to the right to bear arms, and he was saying that the right to procedure, which is an abortion, versus the right to bear arms. He was saying that if we were to implement a new restriction on who may sell firearms and ammunition, such that only 2 vendors in the state of Alabama were capable of complying with the restriction, then the defenders of this law would be called upon to do a heck of a lot of explaining, and rightly so in the face of an effect so severe. But I think that completely his comparison completely misses the point. It's not like we're just saying, hey, we're only going to let these 2 abortion clinics operate just like indiscriminate, like, we're like, just these 2. I think the law is put in place for common sense restrictions. So it would be a better analogy would be to say like, okay, if you're going to sell ammunition, then you need to do background checks or something.
Exactly.
Well, okay, that makes sense.
Exactly.
Everybody can participate in that, just in the same way that these abortion facilities can participate in these regulations. And there's other laws that have already put these similar laws like this into place. Missouri, North Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, and Utah. It's been blocked in Kansas and Wisconsin. So it's completely possible, right? And I know in Texas we've also seen once these types of laws get put into place with admitting privileges, that abortion facilities don't have to close, but they do close on their own accord, right? I know I've seen, I think it was Abby Johnson that posted on her Facebook page, like, look at all these Texas abortion facilities closing. It's not that they have to close. They can make money. They can do everything that they can, but they're more interested in making more money than they are remaining open and, taking care of women.
That's the exact thing. The judge is acting as if all of these abortion clinics that don't meet these standards would have to close. Like they don't have the option of going through the process to get their doctors admitting privileges or to get doctors who have admitting privileges. And well, that does raise a question. How come there aren't enough doctors willing to do abortions?
Yeah, that's another good point.
It's a big moneymaker. Why, why can't you find, why are they not readily available?
Exactly.
But it is this idea that somehow the abortion clinics are the victims and Planned Parenthood and a couple other abortion clinics were the ones that brought this lawsuit.
Right.
So rather than saying we're going to raise our own standards, we're going to raise the bar internally and say our doctors are going to have these things, they're saying, oh, no, we want to keep our standards the way they are. We need you guys to lower the bar legally as well.
Right. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Exactly.
Not common sense. All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode. Our website is heroicmedianews.org.
That's it for this week. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.